Well, good morning, YouTube. This is Chuck, and today is Monday, November 11th, 2024, at about 11 in the morning, and it's Veterans Day. And today I'm going to be doing some storytelling over at Noley's, and they asked me to do something regarding veterans. So was putting some veteran stories together, and I realized that some of them would be good for a video as well. And I haven't put up a video in a few days. I put up a little short yesterday, and it hasn't really done very well. So I got 4 veteran stories I'm going to tell you this morning, and the first one's going to be about my father. And my father was born in 1915, and born and raised in a little town outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And he was from a New England family, an established New England family, and his father died fairly early. And so his mother raised him and his 4 siblings on a school teacher salary. And I'm sure they didn't have a real easy time of it, even back then. But his brothers and sisters, they all stayed back east initially and got regular jobs. But my dad had a little bit of a wanderlust in him. And so he decided to do something different. And so he became a truck driver. Well, stop and think about truck driving and back in the mid-30s. And it wasn't anything like truck driving today is. The trucks were small and they didn't have much power. And the roads were narrow and windy and steep. And, when I drive the old fire truck over at the museum, that's a 1943. And that's using pretty much the same technology that they used back in the mid-30s for truck drivers. And, they went real slow up the hills and they didn't have very good brakes. So if you weren't real careful, you went pretty fast down the hill. So anyway, when World War II came along, he decided to join the Army. And so he did. And, being that he was already an experienced truck driver, of course, the Army couldn't make him do that. So they assigned him to the Army Air Corps. The Air Force hadn't been broken away yet, so the Air Wing was called the Army Air Corps. And so they made him into an airplane mechanic, more specifically on B-24 Liberators. Well, he got sent overseas. He went to Sicily initially. And then as the war progressed, they moved him up into the lower part of Italy, up around Naples somewhere. And he was working well behind the front lines, back from the front lines. In other words, he was not in a combat situation, and he was not in a situation where they were in any danger by that time during the war. And he told me one time, he said the scariest part of the whole time was on the troop ship going over there, because there was an ocean liner, and he says it was a pretty nice ship actually, but the German U-boats, the wolf packs, they were still active, and so they spent many a sleepless night making sure that they worried about whether the ship was going to get shot out from under them out in the Atlantic somewhere. But they made it, and so he said that he spent his time over there working on B-24 Liberators, and at the time they were trying to cut off the flow of fuel to the Germans, and they were bombing the oil fields in Ploestua. And every morning they'd send them off, and most days they'd all come back, and some days one of them wouldn't, and so they lost some air crews. But my dad said his job was a 7-day-a-week job because it was during the war, but he said they spent all hours patching those planes up, putting them back together, and servicing them, and reloading them, and refueling them, and getting all ready to go the next day. And he did that right up until the end of the war. Well, after the war was over, he came back home, and he didn't want to stay in the military. He didn't care for the military all that much, and so he went back to driving a truck. So that's story number 1. Story number 2 is going to be me. And, I was in the military during the Vietnam conflict. I didn't go to Vietnam. That's why my hat says Vietnam era veteran instead of Vietnam veteran. But basically, I went to my junior and senior year of high school. I went through a auto mechanics vocational ed program, and I actually won the top automotive mechanics student in my senior year. And won a box full of tools, and I got picked up by a Chevrolet dealership. I lived in Mesa, Arizona, just down the road from where I live now. And the Chevrolet dealership, they made me a mechanic in the used car department, and they thought I had potential, and they were going to put me on as a line mechanic, and they were kind of training me for that. And so fixing used cars was kind of interesting because you didn't have to work on the same thing all the time. You got to work on all kinds of different stuff. And so it's a training ground kind of for the new mechanics coming in and the old mechanics on the way out. And I worked with a couple old guys named Mac and Ike, and they were both getting ready to retire, and so they kind of taught me the ropes that they needed to know, and pulled a few pranks on me over I was a gullible young kid, and so I learned quite a bit working there. But and while I was there, I ordered my first new vehicle. I ordered a 1968 Chevy half-ton short bed, two-wheel drive, with the biggest motor I could get in it because I was a hot rodder, and it was a 396. And I didn't want a truck 4-speed, so I actually ordered it with the 3-speed, which was the standard transmission it came with it. 3 on the tree, they called it. Column shift. And my goal was, as soon as it came in, I was going to pull that 3-speed out, and I was going to put a Muncie 4-speed in it and make a hot rod. Well, I ordered that truck, and guess what? I got a draft notice. Now, at the time, of course, they were drafting everybody in sight and sending them to Vietnam, and they'd kind of run out of 19-year-olds, and so they were drafting the older guys, the guys in their mid-20s that were already married and going to school, and they also drafted younger guys. I was 18. And so anyway, I got drafted, and I went in and told the dealership, I said, hey, I got my draft notice, and they were real cool about it. They said, don't worry about it. We'll sell that truck to somebody. And it came back just a couple days before I left, so I never got to buy it. I never even rode in it, but I did get a chance to look at it when it came in off the truck. So anyway, I reported for duty like I was supposed to, and they loaded 220 of us from the Phoenix area. They loaded us all on buses in the middle of the darn night and hauled us down to Fort Bliss, Texas for basic training. And the basic training center was up on the foothills there. It was called Logan Heights, and so, of course, they did the normal thing, trying to turn us all into soldiers, and yelled and screamed at us. And that was before the Army had to be nice to you. And so they were all pretty mean to us new recruits. And having a drill sergeant getting 6 inches from your face screaming at you, it didn't set real well with me, but there wasn't much I could do about it. But so anyway, after I went through basic training, they were sending most everybody to Fort Polk, Louisiana for infantry training, but for whatever reason, I ended up getting sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for field artillery training. And they were going to make me into a field artilleryman, or otherwise known as a gun bunny. And so I went through that training for the next 8 weeks. And that was in April of 1968. And anybody knows anything about Southwest Oklahoma in April, that's mud season. And the soil there is a real thick, sticky, caliche clay type stuff, and sticks to everything. And so wrestling those big guns around in the mud, old Chuck got hurt. I was injured. I actually injured pretty seriously. I had basically what happened was my abdominal wall blew out, and I had a big hernia. And they rushed me into emergency surgery to fix it on a Sunday. And so after I got out of that, I was deemed non-combat capable, and I wasn't hurt bad enough to discharge, but I was hurt bad enough that they reclassified me, and they gave me an administrative job, and so I became a personnel administrator, and that's what I did for the rest of the war. Or I shouldn't say the rest of the war, the rest of my time in the military. And so I was assigned at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I never left, and they promoted me straight there. I was in a pretty vital area, and I made it a point to try to do a good job. And I got promoted pretty regularly. I made E5, Specialist E5 in 10 months service time, which is almost unheard of. But like I say, I was working in a critical spot. And they tried really hard to get me to re-enlist, and they promised me staff sergeant at 22 months if I'd re-enlist. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't like the military. And I told them flat out, I said, I'm going to do the best job I can for you while I'm here. But the day I can leave, I'm gone. And I didn't hurt my feelings not going to Vietnam, because I didn't necessarily agree with the war. But anyway, I did my job. I had a pretty steady. My job was fixed well enough that it was kind of one of those things that it had a lot to do with people coming and going. And of course, in a training center, you have a lot of people coming and going. But in days when everybody was in the middle of their training cycles and nobody was leaving and nobody was coming in, my job was kind of boring, actually. And so they assigned me an assistant, and I trained him up to replace me. And so basically, I had my days pretty free. I had to stay on post, but I did some interesting things. I made a friend over in Air Ops, and so on some days I'd go fly helicopter with him. And he was a crew chief loadmaster on a CH-47 Chinook, and they did a lot of flights moving groups of troops back and forth on post, and also hauling guns around. And we were training at the time on the old World War II vintage 105 howitzers. The new lighter weight versions are what they're using in Vietnam, but they weren't using them for training. They were using the old style. And so we'd haul them around from place to place for training exercises, and we'd move groups of troops around. So I got to fly in helicopter quite a bit. And I got to look around the other parts of post. And my supervisor was a first sergeant, and he'd kind of loan me out to other units when they'd have paperwork issues that they'd need to deal with. And so I got a little chance to do some of that. But my job was stable enough. I actually was able to work off post, and so I got a job at an auto parts store in Lawton, Oklahoma. And I'd work, they were open till 9 at night, and I'd get off at 4:30 with my Army job, and I'd change clothes right quick. I can run across town, and I go to work there about 5 o'clock, and I work till close in an auto parts store, and that helped me keep me sane. And I was able to get a little spot off post. I was required to maintain a room on post, and so I did. I had an NCO room in the old World War II barracks, and I had to keep that up, and I'd go in there 2-3 times a week and make sure it was dusted and everything was ship shape. But I didn't have to stay there. So what I ended up doing, believe it or not, is I ended up buying an old 1953 International Metro step van, and put a bed in it, and found a place to park it in somebody's backyard. And I only gave $350 for it, and it cost me $20 a month to park it. And that gave me a little spot off post where I could go and hang out. And as I said, the military didn't fit my personality very well. And so that between that and the job kept me busy and kept me sane, brought in a little bit of money, because being in the military didn't pay very good at that time. But I did that right up until I got out, and got out in February 1970. And loaded up my truck and headed west and came back to Arizona. So that's my story number 2. My story number 3 and number 4 both are going to be a couple of young men that worked for me at the fire department. And back in that day, in the early days, I was the only paid employee on the department. And later on, I got a paid assistant chief and a paid clerk. So there were 3 of us administrative types that were full-time employees, but all the troops were all still volunteers. And during that period of time, we had a junior volunteer program, and that was for 16 and 17-year-olds, with the idea being that we get them all trained up, and so when they became full-fledged firefighters, when they turned 18, they'd already have all the training necessary. And of course, it was a recruitment tool. Well, my story number 3 and story number 4 involve a couple of young men that came in as junior firefighters. And first one I'm going to tell you about is a young guy named Ray. And Ray's father was a pretty prominent real estate guy here, and he had an airplane. And his airplane was a Cessna 182. And Ray's his goal in life is he wanted to join the Air Force. And he wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and he wanted to be a fighter pilot. And so his dad paid for his pilot's lessons, and they could do that in Arizona. You can do that at 16. And so at 16 years old, as a junior firefighter, he got his private pilot's license. Well, he's pretty proud of that, and he had a right to be. And so he came into the station, and his dad gave him permission if any of the guys up there that wanted to, that he'd take him for a ride in the airplane. Well, the guys, he was, good grief, a 16-year-old kid, and he had a lot high energy kind of personality. And so some of the guys, they kind of thought about it and said, yeah, I ain't going flying with him. And so he asked me if I wanted to, and I said, sure, I'll do that. I trust you. And so we went up to the airport, and he took off, and we did about an hour or so scenic flight around the area, and I ended up being the first passenger that he ever flew in his dad's airplane. And that was pretty special to me, and I think it was pretty special to him. Well, as soon as he got old enough, Ray enlisted in the Air Force, and he tried to get into fighter pilot school, but they told him his vision wasn't good enough. And so they redirected him, I guess you'd say, and he ended up becoming a radar officer on an AWACS plane. And you know the AWACS planes, they're those big airliner-looking things with a big dome shape on the top. And so he ended up flying that, and he ended up getting promoted steadily through. They made him an officer. And by the time his career was over, he stayed in the Air Force for 20 years. And he retired as a major, and he worked his entire career out of AWACS planes and ended up being the commanding officer on one. And he flew all over the world, every hot spot, every place we had aircraft operating, we had the AWACS, which stands for Airborne Warning and Control. So it's a coordination like a flying control tower. And they monitored everything that was going on, and they'd stay just outside the threat range. And so he ended up flying all over the world doing that. So when Ray retired, he actually moved back here for a while, and he came to work at the college when I worked at the college. And so we got a chance to work together after all those years. And that was pretty cool. Well, I retired from there, and Ray went on to become our local airport manager. And he worked there for a number of years before he finally decided to retire himself. And I haven't seen him for quite a while. I'm not even sure he's still in town. But anyway, that's my third story. A young firefighter that went on to a successful career in the Air Force and retired as a major. Well, my fourth story involves another junior firefighter, and this guy's name was Lyle. Now, Lyle's parents ran a couple of businesses here in town, and he came on also as a junior firefighter. And he decided when he got old enough, that he wanted to go in the Air Force, but he wanted to become a full-time firefighter as well. So he went in the Air Force as well, and went to firefighting school and became an Air Force crash rescue firefighter. Well, he was assigned to a Air Force base in England. It was called RAF Woodbridge. And RAF Woodbridge it's obviously a British installation, but the only American Air Force personnel that were assigned there, believe it or not, were the firefighters. And that's a very, very important refueling stop for our Air Force. And so there was planes coming and going daily. U.S. Air Force planes would land, refuel, and take off again from RAF Woodbridge. And like a lot of Air Force installations, both in this country and in England, a lot of the firefighting command officers were all civil service guys, and they were civilians. But the firefighters themselves were all Air Force guys. And so there was a lot of tension involved there. And some of the guys there the British guys, they didn't like the Americans much, and they didn't treat the Air Force firefighters very well. And so Lyle didn't like it over there all that much. And while he was there, one of the things he did is he joined the equivalent of the local volunteer fire department in the little village that he lived by. And over there, they don't call them volunteer firefighters. They call them retained firefighters. And so anyway, Lyle was a retained firefighter for 4 years over there. But they only got called out. They didn't have very many fires. They only got called out once every 3 months or so, so like 4 times a year. So it's pretty hard to maintain enthusiasm when you're not called out doing anything. And one of the problems, of course, with crash rescue firefighters is that they most of the time it's pretty boring, and it's 99% boredom and 1% stark terror when something bad happens. And so Lyle did that for a while, and every day he'd watch those cargo planes coming in and leaving, and coming in and refueling and leaving, flying to every corner of the globe from there. And so Lyle decided that, hey, I want to do that. So when his enlistment was up, he re-enlisted and went to what they call loadmaster school. And the loadmaster on a cargo plane, he's the guy that makes sure that the cargo is loaded correctly. It's got to be balanced front to rear. It's got to be balanced side to side. It obviously can't exceed the load limit of the aircraft for where it's going. And so it's a pretty important position on a cargo plane. And if you stop and think about the cargo planes, they're the delivery trucks of the sky, and they go every place that anything military happens. They're the first ones to arrive and the last ones to leave. They haul the troops in, they haul the equipment in, they haul all the troops and equipment back out again when it's all over. And so Lyle spent the next few years flying to every single corner of the globe, every place there was any kind of a conflict where our troops were involved, any place there was a little dust-up, the cargo planes were there. And he started out being a loadmaster on a C-141, and then he transferred to C-130s. And, we hadn't heard anything from Lyle for a couple of years. We'd ask his parents every once in a while how he was doing, and they'd tell us. But during Operation Desert Shield, before Operation Desert Storm, the troops were over there on Thanksgiving, and there was a news crew that was flying with a cargo plane. They were dropping Thanksgiving Day dinners to the troops by parachute. They were kicking pallets out the back door, and they're parachuting the Thanksgiving turkey down to the troops on the ground. And it was one of the well-known news crews, and it might have been Dan Rather. I don't remember exactly who it was. But anyway, they were flying in an Air Force plane, and they were showing them pushing the pallets out the back door. And they panned around inside the airplane, and by golly, there was Lyle. He was the loadmaster or cargo master on that particular airplane, and he was on national news talking to the news crew about dropping the turkey dinners to the troops down there, and that was pretty cool. Well, Lyle went on to work on C-5s and C-17s, and basically every cargo master or every cargo plane that the Air Force had. And he flew all over the world, and he eventually got assigned to what was called McClellan Air Force Base, which now is a private field. It's been decommissioned as an Air Force base up near Sacramento, California. And he got assigned to what they call the Rapid Deployment Force, which is a group that would get together and go to any corner of the world wherever there was a problem, and be part of the response to that. And then he got into training, so he got training people doing what he was doing, and he eventually retired and bought a house there in a little community somewhere in that neighborhood and got married. And as far as I know, he still lives there. His parents are both gone now, but that's story number 4. So that's 4 little stories about the veteran stories for Veterans Day, and I'm going to be talking about that stuff at Noley's today, but I thought you might be interested in hearing that. So I don't know how long this one's gone on, but it's probably gone on long enough. So as always, let me tell you, as I always do, and take care of each other and love each other. And being this Veterans Day, if you're a veteran yourself, thank you for your service. If you're not a veteran, find somebody, a friend, relative, neighbor, or somebody who is, and tell them thank you for their service. And until I talk to you again, I'll give you one more look over here at my bottom yard, and I'll just tell you peace out.